Hey there, hope everything's going well for you. I just wanted to show you my first ever advanced stitching tutorial. I'm going to show you how to do these two different techniques for satin stitch for when you're trying to do a shape that has a curve or a shape that has essentially like a shorter distance on one side and a longer distance on the other. If you were to just stitch this straight with satin stitch, essentially you'd have really bulky stitches down where the shape becomes very narrow. So there are two different things you can kind of do to avoid the bulky stitches. One of these things is called stitch tucking, and the other one is called stitch sharing. So I'll kind of show you how these two things work, and hopefully it'll help you with some of your satin stitch projects. For this tutorial, I'm using all 6 strands of DMC embroidery thread, and I just tie a little knot on the end of my thread to start my projects. So let me show you how to do these. So essentially for stitch tucking, I'm going to be working in this down direction towards a narrow space. So I have a lot of space up here and I'm working towards a narrow space kind of in the center. And so this would be like what a lot of flower petals will look like. So I'm actually going to start in the middle of the petal. So I'm going to go for the middle and then go down. And so like I said before, if you kind of were to just like scooch over to the next section and put the next stitch like in the same place that you would normally for a typical satin stitch, you're going to find out really quickly that you don't have enough room for how many stitches you need to go around the entire petal. So I'm going to do something that is called stitch tucking. I'm going to come up where I normally would for my next stitch, but this time instead of going all the way down to the bottom, I'm actually going to come like almost to the bottom with this one. Come up where I would normally next at the top of the petal, and I'm going to tuck one more stitch. So I'm going to put it kind of like right next to where I ended the last stitch, and here's where the magic happens. So essentially I'm going to come up again where I normally would on this petal, but I'm going to come back down almost essentially in the same hole as the last stitch that I came down with. So now you can see that you can't even tell that those stitches aren't coming through to the center. So I'm going to go ahead and do this side, finish it out, and then zoom in for the last side. Okay, so finishing out this petal, I'm going to go ahead and just tuck some more stitches. So I'm not quite going under the stitches that I'm next to, but I'm going pretty close. And you notice that I'm kind of stacking the stitches when I don't go all the way to the center of the petal. So I'm not ending them in the same place, but I'm kind of like stair-stepping them. So now I'm going to do my magic stitch. Again, almost essentially in the same hole as the last stitch that came all the way through to the bottom. And there we go. I'm filling out this really nice shape. So I really only need like 2 more stitches to finish this, this side. So these stitches can actually be pretty normal because I have enough space on the bottom to finish them. So put that one there. That might actually be my last one. Yeah, so now I'm going to zoom in and do the other side. Awesome, so I finished out this flower petal, and you can see I zoomed in like a lot in my last video. You can see that you really can't tell where the stitches are tucked, and it doesn't look like it's super bulky at the bottom here. So this is called, I call it stitch tucking. And yeah, so the next thing I'm going to show you is called stitch sharing. I've also seen this called radial satin stitch because you're radiating out from the center of something. So this also could be used for flower petals, I guess, depending on where you're starting from. But I'm going to show you with this kind of little box-ish shape how to do stitch sharing. And this essentially is going to be, you'll place your stitches and you'll come up through the same hole that you placed a stitch in order to share that stitch where the space is really compact. For stitch sharing, I'm going to start from the bottom of the shape and radiate out. So again, I'm going to start in the middle. I like starting in the middle because it kind of gives you like a guiding line of what you're moving towards. So I'm going to start in the middle, and for a lot of the middle, I'm going to kind of keep it the same, but once I start going out in this diagonal direction, I'll start doing more stitch sharing. So I think this will be my last normal stitch and I'll start stitch sharing. So now I'm going to come up through this same hole right here and just place my stitch like normal. So that stitch was stitch shared, and I'm just going to alternate between doing a normal stitch and then sharing that stitch. So here's a normal stitch where I just came up right next to that last stitch, and now I'm going to come up in that same hole. Here's my needle coming up through that same shared stitch, and I'm going to place it like normal up here on the top. So you can see that this is going to create a bottom that's a little bit bulkier than the stitch tucking up here, but it's a really nice way to create very full shapes that move from a small compact center outward, so like flower petals. But yeah, I'm going to finish out this shape. I think I just need one more normal stitch, and then I'm going to zoom in on this side and show you what it looks like up real close. You see my finished product here with the stitch tucking, and you might have seen my fabric pucker like a little bit when I was pulling my satin stitches. So you just want to make sure your fabric is very taut in your hoop. So my fabric had gotten kind of loose from pulling through so many times. So just make sure that you're tightening your fabric as you go along, and that's going to give you really nice smooth satin stitches. But yeah, I hope this was helpful. I actually use this technique quite a lot. I use it in this pattern for my rainbow or pastel brains. So you can even see right here where all of these stitches go towards this area. I use some of that radial stitching. But yeah, there are plenty of areas on here where I'm doing some kind of stitch tucking or radial stitching. So yeah, I hope this was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions.